Yes, this is the lineup.
I think he did it.
So we're going to just pass the mic down the row. I want you all to introduce yourself to the audience with your names, pronouns, and how you're affiliated with the case. But during your introduction, also please share what is your most impactful memory from that time 10 years ago that continues to stay with you and encourage you to this day.
Okay, hi, welcome everyone. My name is Greg Burke. My pronouns are he, him, and my husband here is next to me. He'll get a chance to speak if I choose to give him the mic here in a minute. But I know you've heard a lot about Jim and his story over the years, but just so you know that Jim has been so gracious to include all of the other plaintiffs. He always calls us out and reminds people that there were 38 plaintiffs from 4 states who were involved in Obergefell. Jim, you're the best spokesperson we could have had. We really appreciate you every day. But there were a lot of other stories. So in Kentucky, for example, we had six families who were part of the case with the Kentucky case. And so we all have our stories to tell. And hopefully we'll get to share a little bit of that with you today. As far as the most impactful part of the whole experience, for me, it was on decision day when we were in the court, the Supreme Court, and we got to hear the decision read. We got to hear the majority opinion from Justice Roberts read to us. That was just the minority. Roberts was the majority, right? Oh, no, I'm sorry. Okay, you're right. Oh, my gosh. Yeah, right. He was the one that really pissed me off, right? Yeah, it was Kennedy. So when they called the case and Kennedy was going to read the opinion, it's like, okay, that's when we knew we won. And I can remember Michael and I were sitting in the court together, and there's so much decorum and so much security. You had people in black suits standing everywhere, and it's like you just better not make a noise or step out of line. And so the best we could do was just kind of hold hands and squeeze and turn to each other and whisper, we won. And it was just a really incredible experience for me personally. So I will now pass it on.
Hello, my name is Michael DeLeon, he, him, and like my husband just said, we went through the whole case from Kentucky along with our 2 sons. So, they were also with us on decision day. We got to wait in line. Well, we really didn't have to wait in line. We had line standers, but we had some interaction with Jim, and I was telling Jim earlier, our kids, they really liked this picture. I think they took a selfie with them, and as we were waiting in the bowels of the Supreme Court right down there until we got to the court. But just like Greg, I guess the memory I have was very similar to his, and our kids were with us, and just the looks on their faces, and our older son, he's pretty expressive, and when Justice Roberts was reading his rebuttal, that he was just couldn't believe it, and I was nervous about him doing an outburst. But that was a wonderful day, and just being out on the steps of the Supreme Court. One other favorite picture I have, Jim, is you were talking to President Obama, and our older son is just leaning in, and he's in all the shots.
Thank you, Michael. So Jim Obergefell, he, him. How am I connected to this case? I don't remember, no. I have loads of favorite memories, but I think the one that stands out to me, much like Greg's story, it's when Justice Kennedy's reading the decision and it sinks in that, yeah, we won. Number one, thinking about John, missing John, but then the unexpected realization that for the first time in my life as an out gay man, I felt like an equal American. Yeah. I wish I still did.
Hi, I'm Al Gerhardstein, he, him, and I want to Thank you. Thank you. You're very kind. So, what you may not know is that as we're doing this panel, one of us might just start twirling around because these chairs move. So, don't be freaked out by that. But I have two of the many impactful memories that I want to share. One is just the humbling time when I stood in Jim and John's apartment, or the condo, and they agreed to file this case. John was very much a partner in that decision. And, you know, here they were giving up their grieving time, giving up their last few weeks together, giving up the time they could have shared just to hunker down and reminisce. And instead, we're going to war. So that was amazing and, as I say, very humbling. The other memory is kind of lawyery. But I'm standing in court, and I have sued both the state
Many times.
and the city. Because the city Office of Vital Statistics was the bureau that actually signed the death certificate. So I had to sue the individual, Camilla Jones, who would be ordered to write the correct death certificate. And so the city comes into court at our very first time, and the state defends the statute and the constitutional amendment banning same-sex marriage, and then the city stands up and the judge says, "And what's your response?" And the city lawyer says, "We agree with the plaintiffs." I mean, I've never had that happen. I mean, a guy I sued said that we were right and wasn't going to fight. That was awesome.
I'm Rick Hodges. I was director of the Department of Health, and at the time. And if I get the order right, Al and Jim, they sued Governor Kasich, and then Attorney General DeWine at the time, and then Ted Winslow, who was in my position. And then when he left, they sued Lance Himes, who was in my position. And then I got hired, and the music stopped, and there was no place for me to sit down. That's really about my role, and it's how important it is. And I get to sit up with these guys. But I was extraordinarily uncomfortable, but I was fully aware that you were a lot more uncomfortable than I was. So I wanted to conduct myself with dignity for the sake of everybody, including the people in this room. My greatest memory, actually one was funny. About a year after the case, our mutual friends got us together to see if Jim and I wanted to meet each other.
Equality Ohio did it.
Equality Ohio, yeah. I was excited because I got to meet the Mick Jagger of the civil rights world. He looked like he was being ushered into the presence of the Antichrist. And that was fun. But the most meaningful experience, a few days before the decision came out, a friend of mine who has been my friend since we were in college, has been in a long-term same-sex relationship, called me up and said, "Rick, do you know when you're going to lose? Because I want to be the first person in Ohio to get married." And I said, "Well, Steve, I don't think the Chief Justice calls you up and says, nah, you're going to lose." I don't know about these things, but I doubt it. And I can't use influence just to make sure you're the first person to get married, but I really hope you are. And he said, "Well, that's okay." He said, "Would you read the Bible at my wedding?" And I said, "Of course I would do that." And we were up at the top floor at Lindy's downtown, and the room was filled with, this guy's an active Republican and has been, filled with Republican leaders. And it was so curious for me to think, if it wasn't for the people in this room, we could have been here a long time ago. But at least we're here today.
Let me add one story about Rick, because I come out of the Supreme Court with Jim, and we're all very excited. I call the mayor of Cincinnati, and I tell him, we have 3 more clients that want to get married today. Now, this is decision day. If you know anything about the way the Supreme Court operates, they have to return the mandate to the courts below. It's like weeks and months before a case can actually be implemented. But because this guy knew he was going to lose, he had already organized all the paperwork across the state, and our local Republican probate judge was ready, and we had 3 clients married on decision day because of him.
That's incredible. Thank you all for those amazing stories. So I want to talk a little bit about what it took to get to this point 10 years ago. Many of you, you've all seen the documentaries, we've all read the books, we know some of the story, but what are some things that people are not aware of regarding the hills that were climbed and the surprising barriers that may have existed that we may take for granted today?
Start. Yeah, you can start.
Start here. All right. So one of the things that I thought was pretty interesting from our perspective, the Edie Windsor case was dropped on June 26th, and so exactly 30 days after that, we filed our case in Kentucky on July 26th. But what was surprising to us, I thought, was the criticism that we received. We thought that we were going to be, we expected, being from Kentucky, that there would be a lot of criticism from politicians and whatnot, but what we didn't expect was that the LGBTQ community was also critical of us because they thought that our case was not in the proper order, we were not in the right venue where we were going to be successful. They thought we were told that we were going to do harm to the movement because our case was likely to lose, and it was, there was so much momentum at that time with states actively, progressively pursuing marriage equality, and here we are from Kentucky, and we came up and it's like, oh, so we were really disheartened. It's like we thought we were doing this really great thing, and it's like all we got was criticism from all sides. It was very kind of disturbing. The other thing that I thought was interesting about our case that evolved over a couple of years, and maybe you all can talk about this too, but when Michael and I filed our case, it was the 2 of us, and we had 2 attorneys. So 2 plaintiffs, 2 attorneys, Burke versus Bashir, and it was very simple, very straightforward. We've been together for 34 years. How many? 43 years. Keep me straight. 43 years. Man. And it's just been a lot because we got married in 2004, and we had been through so much to get to that point. We were just, we were surprised by the criticism, and then we filed our case and we thought, okay, well, we're kind of locked in now. Well, then what happened was our attorneys started adding other plaintiffs to the case, and so by the time we were done, Burke versus Bashir had 4 families, and we had added numerous attorneys, and it was just incredible how complex it became managing all the dynamics of all the additional plaintiffs that came in, and then all the additional attorneys that came in, and who was doing what, and how do we interact with everyone. It was, we got into it thinking it was going to be really straightforward and it was something we were going to do together, kind of quiet, and we never dreamed it would turn into what it turned into. We were just seeking marriage recognition in Kentucky for our legal marriage from Canada, and it just turned into so much more. And boy, we certainly weren't expecting that, or we probably wouldn't have signed up for it. That's all I have to say.
In our family, I'm known as like the photo hog. I have photos and I don't delete them. I keep them. And the beauty of that is on OneDrive, I get all these reminders every day. And I'm surprised, like even back in 2012, we were at before we even got involved with the case, we were holding a sign that says marriage is a constitutional right. And I just think as, getting to the time that we filed the case, all the stars were aligning. We were out in our community. We were out to our families. We were out to our, places of employment. So all these things really helped us, ease into, the marriage equality fight. It wasn't an easy fight, but it was easier just having the support, even the support of our two kids. Our parents were, most of them were alive at that time. So in our church, it was just amazing that, all these stars aligned and made the journey, to the Supreme Court for us, a lot easier than it could have been.
So when this man next to me came to our condo, I honestly think if it had been any other attorney, I'm not sure we would have said yes. And I want to share a story that says so much about the character of Al. I think for any attorney who's been admitted to the Supreme Court bar, their dream is, I want to argue a case in front of that court. That's my dream. It's the reason I've been admitted to this bar. I want to argue a case. So as a civil rights attorney, arguing a civil rights case in front of the Supreme Court, I'm pretty confident was something Al really wanted to do. And those of us in the Ohio case, we really wanted him to do it as well, because after all, it was Obergefell v. Hodges, so it makes sense that Obergefell's attorney would do this. Well, other attorneys in the case said, well, we really think we should have someone who has already argued cases in front of the Supreme Court. Which, okay, I guess I can see that. But this team of more than 20 attorneys agreed, let's have a moot court, and we'll let Al do a practice argument for the right to recognition, and we'll let the attorney that the Tennessee attorneys want to argue, Douglas Howard Dreimeyer, he'll have a chance to argue as well. And they invited plaintiffs to be there, so we were there, and after they finished their moot arguments in front of 3 attorneys acting as judges, they asked our opinions, and then they said, okay, get out. Then, as a team, all of the attorneys watched the video of their 2 arguments, and Al, feel free to correct me if I get any of this wrong, but after watching the video, then they were going to discuss who is the best person to argue in front of the Supreme Court. And Al brought the conversation to a stop and said, Douglas did better than I did. He should argue. Wow. We have to do what's in the best interest of our clients. Douglas should argue.
You've heard both Greg and Jim say that this was recognition. There were 2 issues in the Supreme Court. One was marriage itself, which is what all the other cases had been pursuing. And we are the first case that argued for recognition. That's part of the reason we got such shit from all the other civil rights advocates, because we were the backup position. Like if you're not going to give us the full banana and you're not ready to go for marriage itself, at least give us marriage recognition. That is what Edie Windsor's case was. It was ordering the federal government to recognize the valid marriage from Canada through New York. So the second issue in the Supreme Court was marriage recognition. So as we pursued that and we got everybody settled down and organized around the fact that there should be 2 issues so that there would be access to marriage even if you don't get the full thing, it became important to make the most vigorous marriage recognition argument we could make. And it was an honor to be able to elevate that to the position it's in. And while that became sort of a secondary issue that was dissed by some of the advocates in the path to the Supreme Court, now think about it. If marriage equality is reversed in the Supreme Court, they're going to have to deal with 2 issues. Do they reverse the right to marry and marriage recognition? How are they going to reverse marriage recognition? That simply says treat marriage like you treat all the other disparities in various states. One of the arguments we always made in Ohio was If you want to marry your second cousin, you can go to Massachusetts, marry your second or your first cousin, come back to Ohio. Ohio will recognize that marriage. If you want to marry a 15-year-old, go to Georgia. You can marry a 15-year-old in Georgia without parental consent, come back to Ohio, they'll recognize the marriage. So it's those arguments that are still alive and very much affirmed in this Supreme Court decision that will protect us, because it'll be hard to reverse marriage recognition. And the other thing I'll just say, not only did we end up building that into the Supreme Court opinion, but in 2022, that's what the federal law does. It establishes the right to marriage recognition as a matter of a federal statute. So we've built these extra hurdles into protecting marriage that hopefully will, hopefully they won't be needed, but at least they're there.
I guess the only thing I'd add to that, I was not part of their case. They wouldn't tell me what they were up to. But I went to Governor Kasich and said, Governor, we're going to be the named plaintiff. Here's the way I'm going to handle this. It's going to be dignified. We are not going to say anything that's going to rile up the base or get people upset about this. We're just going to quietly go about our business, prepare for the fact that we'll probably lose, and be there to move on when the decision's made. He had said he believes marriage is between a man and a woman. He thinks that's sacred. He owns it. I don't expect you to vote for him. I don't know what his motives were. But he was the first person to say, Rick, I agree with you. These people deserve the dignity of a fair process. And it was with his blessing that we did what we did. So be aware that it's not always, it wasn't a fight ever. It was, but it's not like we hated each other. That wouldn't happen today, though.
Yeah.
If that issue came up again, it would be red meat for the partisan machine.
Yeah.
And it harkens back to a time that was not too long ago. It was a little more civil.
Yeah.
So Al, I know you've already touched base on this, but we brought up the Edie Windsor case quite a bit, and we know that Obergefell v. Hodges wouldn't have happened without that case or the Loving case before it. Is there any other information you want to provide about the precedents or some of the legal strategies that you employed to land the winning argument?
Well, let me just pick up on what Rick just said, because we wouldn't have gotten to the Supreme Court in time to beat Justice Kennedy's retirement if we hadn't had a civil opponent. When we sued the governor and the attorney general, I got a call from the attorney in the attorney general's office. This wasn't an email, it wasn't on paper, it was a phone call saying, can I talk to you about who you've sued? What you've done is you've triggered the need for us to do all the motion practice we can do to defend these publicly elected officials. If you would consider suing bureaucrats like the head of the Department of Health, we could dispense with a lot of that rigmarole and just get to the merits, because we know you want a ruling on the merits. Now, what that requires is that I trust her, that I treat that lawyer as a colleague, and we solve this problem together. And I'm just underscoring that Rick is right. I wouldn't get that call today. The lawyers on the other side would just be, slashing away trying to, create points for their political bosses. But because we trusted each other, I dismissed the governor and the attorney general, sued the head of the Department of Health, and we didn't get to do all that motion practice, and we zoomed in light speed to the Supreme Court. And that's pretty amazing.
Well, and just to illustrate how that light speed was, John and I got married on a Thursday. We met Al on Tuesday. We filed our lawsuit on Friday. I was in federal district court on Monday. So from our marriage to the hearing on our lawsuit, 11 days.
That is fascinating. So I want to go back to Rick for a second. I know you mentioned quickly kind of the story of how you were the last man standing, as you say. Talk a little bit more about the journey for you to kind of end up as the named defendant.
The journey was our attorney came in and said, you're the named respondent in the Obergefell case, and it may go to the Supreme Court. And my real response was, who's Obergefell and what the hell did I ever do to him? And then I was aware there were same-sex marriage cases going through the process, but I didn't know the names. And he said, it's the same-sex marriage case. And I said, you call him up right now, you tell him we're dropping this case, we're just kidding, and let's move on. And he said, it doesn't work that way, you can't do that. Besides, everybody just wants this to be resolved. And so that was, but it did open up just a floodgate of memories of friends who didn't feel safe coming out and telling me they were gay until they were dying of AIDS and they had to tell me. They were safe, but I know times are tough right now, and I'm not trying to say that the battle's over by any stretch of the imagination. But from where we came from 40 years ago to where we are today, there's something to celebrate there. And so it was very emotionally, it bothered me. But after the decision and meeting Jim, and he always lets me tag along to events like this, and I have it's been the greatest experience of my life, making friends with so many people like you, and just getting up and with the chance to say that we are all created equal.
All right, thank you. Jim and Rick, I want you all to talk about your unlikely friendship. And that's because it's become a topic of conversation nationally. You've even publicly showcased your friendship for the greater good through public opposition of Trump. And I want you to tell us the story of your friendship and why you think it's resonating with people.
So Rick mentioned this earlier. A year after the decision, Elena, previous executive director of Equality Ohio, said, Jim, any interest in meeting Rick Hodges? And my response was, I don't know, you tell me, do I want to meet Rick Hodges? And she said, yeah, I think you do. So when Rick said, I walk in, and I love it because I love surprising people, because I think we all do. When you see a lawsuit name, somebody versus somebody, you immediately think, well, they're going to hate each other, or at least not like each other. They're definitely not going to be friends. And I love surprising people and telling them, we're friends. And Rick was on our side the whole time. And I love surprising people with that because they never imagine that's the case. So I feel incredibly fortunate to call Rick my friend, because in my opinion, he exemplifies what it means to be a good human being. And he never once talked to the press. He never showed up in court. He truly was the name. But in the background, he was doing so much to make sure when the state lost, like he said, he expected them to, that everything under his auspices as the head of the Ohio Department of Health would be ready for when they lost. He could send an email, and suddenly every state office had updated forms, steps, etc. I think he just represents what it means to be a public servant, and more importantly, what it means to be a good human being.
The fact that we get to be here together doing things like this is, the bonding that very few people get to go through. and it's been a blessing in my life. And it's I'm here. I would come anyway. Free food, people I like. Tom's paying for all the booze, and I would come anyway. It's fun, but it's a chance for each one of us to say, "Here I stand. I stand with you. You stand with me. We all stand with each other."
I think we should expand this to recognizing those who are in public service, the other bureaucrats, if you will. There's so many that really just want to do a good job, and they are not part of this assault on human dignity that Trump is part of. And I'll just tell you quickly, I'm representing trans people now in Minnesota. And one of the things I do is I help people who have migrated to Minnesota from other states get their birth record changed. So first you got to convince the Minnesota court that it has jurisdiction to order another state to change its birth record. Well, one of the tough ones was Utah. All the Mormons are coming to Minnesota. Well, I wrote to the head of the Bureau of Vital Statistics in Utah, which is a mid-level position, it's not the top of the Department of Health, and said, here is what I propose to put into a Minnesota court order. Would you honor it and change the birth certificate if you got this order? And they wrote back right away saying, sure, which I then attach to my affidavit and submit to the Minnesota court. But it just goes to show that mid-level person is just doing her job. And that's a good job. And she might be sticking her neck out a little bit. Yep. And I've found that in South Dakota. I found it in North Dakota. And I also found it in Ohio when I wrote here. So, yeah, there's a lot of good people just working their jobs that are being demonized unnecessarily. Yep.
I'll add one more story that relates to this. When we were in federal district court for the hearing on our case, when we left after that case, I turned to Al and said, it just doesn't feel like the Assistant Ohio Attorney General who argued for the state. I said, it just didn't feel like her heart was in it. And I said, it's almost like she was the last one to the office that morning and they said, Tag, you're it, you have to go argue. She was also on our side. So you never know where you have allies, and that's what I tell people a lot, especially these days. And I use Rick as an example, I use her as an example. You never know where you have an ally. And that speaks to what exactly Al just said.
So thank you all for that. We technically are out of time, but I do want to end with one last question. Because you talked a little bit about the fight ahead and what we're dealing with today. How are you all finding joy in this current moment and in this current fight?
Wow. Is the bar still open? All right. No, actually, Michael and I both retired within the last 3 years, so we're finding joy in our retirement and spending our lives together every day. I mean, we did a little bit of that in COVID when we were working from home, but now we have this really unbridled freedom to do what we want whenever we want. We don't have to be concerned about how is this going to play at the office, how is this going to play wherever. And so that's just wonderful for us. That brings us a lot of joy. The other thing that brings us a lot of joy in our case is our participation in our church. We've been members of the same parish for the last 38 years in October. And we're both very involved in different ministries. It's Our Lady of Lourdes Catholic Church. We're lifelong practicing Catholics, and our faith gives us great joy, and we enjoy practicing it and being members of our parish community.
Yeah, retirement is a great thing. We really feel blessed to be able to enjoy it. We're both 67 years old, so we're looking good. Thanks. We're approaching 70, and that kind of is a little scary. But I have a lot of hobbies. I I garden, I quilt, I have a pottery studio in our basement. So, I'm just flitting about all day, doing whatever I want. And one of the things that gives me joy is, we've been together 43 years, and I can crack a bad joke, and I'll look over and I'll see a little smirk, and I said, okay, that makes me happy.
I still, when I meet people and they share photos about their spouse, about their family, people hug me, thank me, they cry, that will always bring me joy. So that's one thing. I adopted a cat in December, so Oliver brings me joy. I've continued to be active. I'm on the board of the newly formed Equality Sandusky. I live in Sandusky. So being part of trying to make things better, again, just keeping the fight going. And then I sing with the Fireland Symphony Chorus. So for me, being in that community of people who just love to sing and make music together, that brings me joy. And the thing I really discovered, which was a surprise, after the election or after inauguration, whichever one it was, thought, ooh, do I want to go to chorus? Because I'm sure there are people in there who voted not the way I would want them to. But I went anyway, and I discovered when I'm singing, and I think when anyone's singing, you can't think about anything else. So I lose myself in the music, and that brings me joy.
When Kieran was speaking, he talked about the power of narrative. And narrative is very important to litigators because we don't get your attention if you have a bad story, which was why, this turned into such a powerful case. And what brings me joy is that I'm still suing people. So, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I am sorry that it's still needed, but I really enjoy it.
As somebody who's been sued more than 100 times professionally, usually by Al, I find that sick. Now, this may be melodramatic, I don't know, but when I was in college, my history professor, took me to Germany, and we interviewed former Nazis, people who weren't war criminals that I knew of, but were definitely engaged in baking the bread, driving the trucks, driving the trains, everything at that lower level. And it made a huge impact on me. They could say it was wrong, but they could emotionally distance themselves from responsibility. And it occurred to me that they were very nice. They were very nice people, just like people around all the time. It occurred to me that it's not the great acts of heroism or evil that dictate our times. It's just regular people saying, I'm going to do the right thing today. And that's why I think we're ultimately going to win, because it really does depend on people like us. Just doing the right thing today. Maybe we'll have to pay consequences someday. Maybe we'll have to lead the march in Selma someday. Probably not. Just do the right thing. And I get the opportunity to just do the right thing over and over again. That's joyful.
All right, thank you. We are running out of time, but we do have time for 2 questions. If anyone wants to ask a question of the panel. Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
Why are trans people important to you now?
They've always been important to me.
I didn't mean it like that.
Oh, I know.
I meant now, forgive me, now more than ever.
Yep.
Like, why now are you, maybe, I'm anticipating you've learned some things, and...
For me, and I think I'm not that unusual from a lot of people across the country. Up until 10 years ago, could I say I knew a trans person? No. But now I have lots of trans friends. I have friends who have trans kids. And they deserve the same ability to live their life without fearing for their life as anyone else in this country. And right now, unfortunately, the trans community, they're the most vulnerable, and they are, within our community, the LGBTQ plus community, they are the most marginalized and the most targeted. And we have got to use one voice from this community saying, that's not right, that's not okay.
Because after them, it's us.
Yep. You know,
After them, it's us.
I didn't go to the Supreme Court for marriage equality just for white cisgender gay men.
Yeah.
And I think to me, that's what our community has to do. We have got to root out racism, transphobia, misogyny, you name it. All of those things about othering people who are different, that's got to stop. We are all considered others by the people in power these days. And the only thing we do by being racist, by being transphobic, the only thing we're doing is helping the people who hate us all. And we've got to stop that shit. So, yeah. I'm there for the trans community because there were people who were there for me who weren't gay men. So I have to be there for the people who aren't like me, the people who are being marginalized. And there are a lot of them, and right now the trans community is bearing the brunt. So LGBTQ plus community, get your shit together and stop thinking about yourself. This is not directed towards the people in this room, but you probably know people who need to hear that message.
So I've represented trans people since the 80s, and now I am my granddaughter is trans, and unfortunately, we had to leave Ohio. I am now living in Minnesota to be supportive of her because she couldn't safely be a young kid in Ohio. And that really pisses me off.
Yep.
And I hope that especially through all the things we learned litigating on behalf of gay people, we can translate the legal doctrines. We've won a bunch of cases for trans prisoners, for public employees who are trans. The law is actually pretty good in many ways. And the fact that they've been ostracized and oppressed so publicly is all political. Legally, I have a lot of tools to use on behalf of trans people. And I really expect to be able to continue to do that.
Rick?
The part of your question that really appealed to me was the word person. I said this the other week, I love my country. I love what we stand for. America is exceptional. But if the blessings of liberty do not apply to all of us equally, regardless of nurture or nature, then America doesn't mean anything. And there's some persons out there who are transgender who need the same protections and the same blessings that I have.
Yep.
Just real, you want to go ahead?
Go ahead.
You know, just the erasure that is happening today, you know, it is, the trans community was the first target, and it's, you know, it's coming for all of us. But 10 years ago, when we won the decision to recognize same-sex marriage across the country, I remember having a conversation with one of the attorneys from Kentucky, and, you know, and his point was, he goes, you know, they're going to come after the trans community. That's going to be their target. They lost this one, but they're going to go after them. So it's really sad that that's come to play. But to everyone else's point, we all need to stick together. You know, fight them every day.
Thank you. I think that Cam, you have a question? Okay. Anybody else have a question they want to ask? All right. Well, let's give a round of applause to this amazing panel.